I came home on a random Tuesday afternoon with a bowl of hot chicken soup for my sick husband. Instead of finding him resting in bed, I heard him laughing on his phone, finalizing a plan to steal $1.5 million from my property so he could run away with my own sister. He thought he was outsmarting a simple warehouse manager. He had no idea he had just committed federal wire fraud against a multi-million-dollar artificial intelligence logistics firm. The hallway of our Atlanta home was completely silent as I walked up the carpeted stairs. Elijah had called me at work that morning claiming he had a terrible fever. I had left my office early, worried about him. I pushed the master bedroom door open just a fraction. Elijah was not under the covers. He was standing by the large bay window, fully dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks. His voice held absolutely no trace of illness. "The paperwork is completely forged," Elijah said into his phone, letting out a low chuckle. "Harper has a very simple signature, so it was incredibly easy to copy. We are pulling $1.5 million against her house tomorrow morning. I will see you at the downtown hotel tonight, Savannah. Wear that red dress I like." My breath caught in my throat. My husband was not just stealing my home. He was sleeping with my own sister. He was committing fraud to drain the equity from the house I purchased before our wedding. The bowl of soup slipped from my hands and crashed onto the hardwood floor. Hot broth and shattered porcelain splashed everywhere. I kicked the bedroom door wide open. It slammed hard against the wall. Elijah did not jump. He did not drop his phone. He simply turned around and looked at me. A slow, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He pressed a button to end the call and tossed the device onto the freshly made bed. "You are home early," he said. His tone was perfectly casual, as if we were discussing the weather. "You are forging my signature to steal $1.5 million, and you are sleeping with Savannah," I stated. My voice was dangerously calm. I demanded an explanation. "Get your things and get out of my house right now." Elijah laughed loudly. He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. "Do not be dramatic, Harper. You are overreacting to an adult business conversation. I am simply using this property as collateral to help Trent expand his hedge fund. Trent needs liquid capital to secure a major investment, and your house has untapped equity. It is a temporary loan." "You committed wire fraud," I said, stepping closer. "You faked my signature on a legal document to mortgage a house you do not own." "You are just a warehouse manager," Elijah sneered. He looked down his nose at me. "You track shipping routes for a living. You do not understand high finance or how real generational wealth is generated. Trent is giving us an opportunity to be part of an elite financial circle. You should be thanking me for taking the initiative to secure our future." I stared at him. The arrogance radiating from him was suffocating. He genuinely believed his own lies. He thought he could gaslight me into accepting massive fraud and infidelity as a simple business strategy. "I am not a fool, Elijah," I said. "I heard you tell my sister you would see her at the hotel tonight. I heard you mention the red dress. Are you going to claim you are discussing hedge funds in a hotel room with my sister?" Elijah stepped into my personal space. His eyes turned cold and hard. "Savannah understands how the world works. Savannah knows how to treat a successful man. You spend all your time wearing safety vests and talking to truck drivers. I needed someone who matches my ambition. Now step aside and clean up that mess you made in the hallway. We have guests arriving any minute." Before I could process his audacity, the sound of the heavy oak front door opening echoed up the stairs. "Elijah!" "Darling, we let ourselves in," my mother Vivian called out. "Calvin and Savannah are bringing the champagne. Trent brought the caviar." I marched out of the bedroom and looked down the staircase. Vivian stood in the foyer clutching a designer handbag beside my father Calvin. Savannah wore the exact red dress Elijah had just mentioned on the phone. She held hands with Trent, who surveyed my home with a smug grin. Vivian looked up and saw the spilled hot soup on the floor. "Harper, what is wrong with you? Why are you screaming at your sick husband? Elijah is trying to elevate this family." My father Calvin shook his head in disgust. Your sister is building a real estate empire and needs capital. You have always been jealous of Savannah because she knows how to present herself to high society. You are wearing jeans and a blazer right now. Elijah deserves better, and Trent is offering us a seat at the table. Do not ruin this for us. Savannah crossed her arms, making her diamond rings catch the light. You have always been completely selfish, Harper. You are acting just like you did when you refused to co-sign my luxury car loan in college so you could fund your little shipping hobby. You never want to see anyone else succeed because you are miserable. Vivian pointed a manicured finger at me. Sign the asset release paper, Harper. Trent's rich family is vouching for us at the country club. Do not embarrass us with your petty jealousy. I walked down the stairs, my heart pounding with a cold, focused fury. I reached the bottom step and looked my mother dead in the eye. I picked up the printed asset release document, resting on the entryway table. I ripped the paper in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. My house, my money. I will not fund your delusions. Trent stepped forward. He laughed condescendingly, running a hand through his blonde hair. Actually, Harper, you already signed it, or at least the bank thinks you did. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. You really do not get it, do you? I am doing you a huge favor. People in my circle do not usually associate with urban businesses like yours. I am letting your little warehouse project ride the coattails of my family's generational wealth. You should be on your knees thanking me. Savannah smirked and adjusted her brand new Cartier bag on her shoulder. The price tag on that bag was easily $20,000. Elijah bought it for me, she said sweetly, because he knows how to treat a woman with class. If you try to ruin this deal, we will just have you declared financially incompetent. You have been so stressed and aggressive lately, the courts will give Elijah full control of your assets anyway. They were threatening me. My own parents stood there nodding in agreement, ready to have me committed just to secure their country club status. I did not cry. I did not scream. I looked at the four of them standing in my foyer, so confident in their theft. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. Take the forged papers to the bank, Trent, I said calmly. Let us see exactly how far your generational wealth goes. I walked right past them, opened my front door, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I did not look back as I walked down the driveway and got into my car. As soon as I closed the door, I pulled out my laptop and opened it on the passenger seat. I logged into my bank accounts, using my secure administrative access. My pulse drummed in my ears as the numbers loaded on the screen. The joint savings account I shared with Elijah, which had held $80,000 just yesterday, was completely empty. He had drained every single penny. They thought they had backed me into a corner and left me with nothing. They had no idea they had just stepped into a trap I had built with iron walls. I walked down the remaining stairs, slowly keeping my eyes locked on my mother. Her manicured finger was still pointing at me like I was a disobedient child. I reached the bottom step and looked at the console table by the front door. The asset release documents Elijah had prepared were sitting right there in a neat little stack next to the mail. I picked up the thick stack of papers. The legal jargon blurred together, but the intention was perfectly clear. They wanted to strip away the one thing I owned completely. I looked at my father, Calvin, expecting him to intervene or show a shred of decency. Instead, he just adjusted his golf shirt and looked away, avoiding my gaze completely. He cared more about Trent's imaginary country club connections than his own daughter's security. I held the papers up so they could all see them clearly. Then I gripped the thick stack and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed loudly in the quiet foyer. I placed the two halves together and ripped them again, letting the shredded pieces flutter down onto the hardwood floor right next to my mother's designer shoes. My house, I said, my voice dangerously low and steady. My money. I will not fund your delusions or Elijah's gambling habits. Trent let out a loud, condescending laugh. He stepped forward, running a hand through his blonde hair. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. Actually, Charmaine, he said, a smug smile spreading across his face. You already signed it. Or at least the bank thinks you did. I stared at him, letting his words sink in. He was openly admitting to federal wire fraud right in my foyer. He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway, acting like he owned the place. You really do not get it, do you? Trent continued, his tone dripping with unearned superiority. I am doing you a huge favor. People in my circle do not usually associate with urban businesses like yours. I am letting your little warehouse project ride the coattails of my family's generational wealth. You should be on your knees thanking me for bringing you into the fold. My mother nodded vigorously in agreement. Trent is right, Charmaine. You have no vision. You just want to stay small and petty while your sister and her husband are building a legacy. We have spent our entire lives trying to build a respectable name in this city, and you are constantly trying to drag us back down with your blue-collar mentality. Savannah stepped closer to Trent, wrapping her arm around his waist. She deliberately adjusted her grip so her new $20,000 Cartier bag was front and center. Elijah bought this for me, she said sweetly, because he knows how to treat a woman with class. You always dress like a tomboy, Charmaine. It is embarrassing for all of us. If you try to ruin this deal, we will just have you declared financially incompetent. Elijah walked halfway down the stairs, standing just above us so he could look down at me. You have been so stressed and aggressive lately, Charmaine, he added, his voice falsely sympathetic. Throwing hot soup and screaming at your family like a lunatic. The courts will give me full control of your assets anyway. It is for your own good. We are just trying to get you the help you clearly need. They were threatening to have me committed. My own parents stood there silently endorsing this plan, ready to have me locked in a psychiatric hold just to secure their social status at the local country club. The betrayal was so deep and absolute that it bypassed anger and settled into a cold, terrifying clarity. My father finally looked at me and sighed, telling me to just be quiet and let the men handle the business affairs. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw anything else. I looked at the 5 of them standing in my home, so incredibly confident in their theft and their superiority. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile that made my mother take a tiny step backward. Take the forged papers to the bank, Trent, I said, my voice perfectly calm. Go ahead. Let us see exactly how far your generational wealth goes when the federal investigators start auditing your hedge fund. I did not wait for his response. I walked right past them, my shoulder intentionally bumping against Trent's arm. I opened my front door and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. Behind me, I could hear Elijah hissing that he would make me pay for disrespecting them, but his threats sounded weak against the rushing sound in my ears. I walked down the long driveway and got into my car. My hands were perfectly steady as I locked the doors and started the engine. I did not drive away immediately. Instead, I reached into my work tote on the passenger seat and pulled out my laptop. I connected to the secure mobile hotspot and navigated to my primary banking portal. I used my administrative access to bypass the standard login screens. My pulse drummed a steady rhythm as the dashboard loaded on the screen. I clicked on the joint savings account I shared with Elijah. It was the account we used for household expenses and emergency funds. Just yesterday, the balance had been exactly $80,000. I stared at the screen, letting the digital numbers burn into my retinas. The balance was zero. Elijah had drained every single penny while I was at work making soup for him. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought stripping me of my liquid cash and forging a massive loan would leave me helpless and dependent on their mercy. They genuinely believed I was just a glorified warehouse manager who was too stupid to protect herself. They had no idea that my entire net worth was shielded behind a blind trust. They had no idea that the house they were standing in was owned by a corporate entity I completely controlled. And they certainly had no idea that I had intentionally let the property taxes fall 6 months behind, specifically to trigger an automatic legal audit on any new financial encumbrances. I closed my laptop and set it aside. I shifted the car into gear and pulled out of the driveway, leaving my so-called family behind in a house they thought they had stolen. I drove straight toward the downtown financial district to meet my attorney. I was not going to shed a single tear over a cheating husband or a toxic family. I was going to let them dig their own graves, and then I was going to push them all in without a second thought. Trent stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us. He let out a loud, condescending laugh that echoed sharply off the high ceilings of the foyer. He ran his hand through his perfectly styled blonde hair and looked at me as if I were an insect he had just discovered on his shoe. "Actually, Harper," he said, his voice dripping with unearned superiority, "you already signed it. Or at least the bank thinks you did." He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back confidently on the heels of his expensive Italian leather shoes. "You really do not get how the world works, do you, Harper? You should be thanking me right now. I am doing you a massive favor. People in my elite financial circle do not usually associate with urban businesses like yours. Your little warehouse logistics project is cute, but it is completely small time. African American owned businesses always struggle to scale because they lack access to real capital and high society networks. I am letting your company ride the coattails of my family's generational wealth. My last name opens doors in exclusive country clubs that your warehouse keys could never unlock. You should be on your knees filled with gratitude that I am willing to leverage your equity to elevate this entire family out of the working class." He looked me up and down, taking in my simple black work blazer and dark jeans. His lip curled into a visible sneer. "Look at yourself. You do not even look like a chief executive officer. You look like a shift supervisor ready to load a freight truck. You do not understand high finance. You just move boxes around for a living. We are giving you a seat at the adult table, and you are throwing a childish tantrum over a forged signature." Savannah stepped up right next to Trent, matching his arrogant posture. She tossed her long, heavy hair over her shoulder and deliberately lifted her left arm. A brand new bright red designer purse hung heavily from her wrist. The thick gold hardware clinked loudly against her diamond tennis bracelets. It was a $20,000 Cartier bag. "Elijah bought this for me yesterday afternoon," Savannah said, her voice sickeningly sweet. She ran her perfectly manicured fingers over the smooth red leather, making sure I saw every detail of the luxury item. "He bought it as an early celebration gift for securing the $1.5 million loan against your property. Elijah knows how to treat a woman who truly appreciates the finer things in life. He told me he is completely exhausted from being married to a woman who comes home smelling like cardboard boxes and shipping tape every single night. He deserves a wife who belongs at the country club serving champagne, not one who hides in a dusty warehouse looking over spreadsheets." Elijah walked halfway down the staircase and stood looking down at me from above. He adjusted his silk tie and nodded in absolute agreement with Savannah. "It is true, Harper," he said, his tone entirely devoid of guilt or remorse. "You have been neglecting this marriage for years to focus on your little delivery business. You refused to attend the real estate gala last month because you said you had a software deployment. I needed a partner with actual class and social ambition. Savannah provides that exact social status. And now Trent is providing the financial backing we need to live the elite life I deserve." My mother. Vivian stepped forward, positioning herself firmly beside my cheating husband and my deceitful sister. She glared at me with absolute disgust, gripping her own designer clutch tightly. "Listen to your husband, Harper," Vivian demanded. "Stop being so difficult and unnecessarily aggressive. You have always been the problem in this family. You constantly embarrassed us at the country club by talking about supply chain issues instead of networking with the real estate developers. You refused to help pay for Savannah's luxury car loan back in college because you said you needed the money for servers. You have always been selfish. Trent is offering us a direct connection to old money. You will not ruin this opportunity for us." My father Calvin crossed his arms and stared at me coldly from the doorway. "If you try to stop this transaction, we will take severe legal action against you," Calvin warned. "You are clearly suffering from severe stress and mental burnout. You are screaming at your family and acting completely erratic." Savannah smiled maliciously, showing her perfectly white teeth. "That is right, Daddy. Harper has been acting completely crazy for months now. If you go to the bank and try to claim that signature is forged, we will all testify against you. Elijah will tell the police that you have been mentally unstable and highly aggressive at home. We will say you signed the loan papers willingly and simply forgot, because you are overworked and hostile. No one will believe a frantic warehouse worker over a corporate wealth manager and a family of socialites. Elijah stepped down to the bottom of the stairs, invading my space. We will have you declared financially incompetent, Harper. The courts will look at your hostile behavior today, and they will immediately grant me a full conservatorship over your assets. I am your legally wedded husband. I will take permanent control of your company and your bank accounts for your own good. You will lose absolutely everything if you try to fight us on this. So just accept it gracefully. Go back to your warehouse and let the adults handle the real money. The threat hung heavy and suffocating in the air. My own parents, my sister, my husband, and her husband were standing in a united front. They were fully prepared to have me locked in a psychiatric hold and stripped of my freedom just to fund their lavish lifestyles and cover their debts. They expected me to break. They expected me to scream or cry or fall to the ground begging for my family to love me and accept me. I did not shed a single tear. My face remained perfectly blank and composed. I stood entirely still, letting the silence stretch out until the supreme arrogance on their faces began to falter just a fraction. I looked down at the broken porcelain bowl of soup pooling on the floor, and then looked straight into Trent's pale blue eyes. I smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm and cold smile that carried no warmth whatsoever. Take the forged papers to the bank, Trent. I said, my voice completely steady and even. Take them tomorrow morning and demand the money. Let us see exactly how far your generational wealth goes when you try to commit fraud across federal lines. I turned my back on them without another word. I walked out the heavy front door and closed it firmly behind me, shutting them inside the house they thought they had effortlessly stolen. The afternoon air was crisp and biting against my skin. I walked down the long paved driveway with measured, deliberate steps, refusing to look back at the windows. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car and locked the heavy doors, securing myself inside. The moment I was isolated inside the vehicle, I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed my laptop bag. I pulled the computer out and rested it on the steering wheel. I quickly booted up my secure administrative banking portal. I bypassed the standard login screens and went straight to the encrypted asset dashboard. I clicked on the joint savings account I shared with Elijah. It was the account we used for daily expenses and emergency property repairs. Just yesterday afternoon, the balance had been exactly $80,000. I stared at the bright white screen illuminating the dark interior of the car. The balance was zero. Elijah had transferred every single penny out of the account while I was at the office. The routing numbers confirmed the money had been moved into an offshore holding account registered under Savannah's name. The digital paper trail stretched clearly across multiple financial institutions. I closed the laptop screen with a sharp snap and placed it carefully back onto the passenger seat. I gripped the leather steering wheel, feeling the cold material against my palms. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the suburban neighborhood behind. I navigated the vehicle toward the downtown corporate office of my attorney, Evelyn. The trap was officially set, and the federal wire fraud was in motion. I changed my route halfway downtown. Evelyn could wait a few more minutes. The drained savings account meant Elijah and Trent were moving much faster than we originally anticipated, and I needed to intercept their main play before the bank flagged the transaction automatically. I steered my car toward the towering glass and steel structure of the First National Bank headquarters. I bypassed the crowded public parking lots and drove straight down into the private underground executive garage, using the platinum access card I kept hidden in my glove compartment. The main lobby was filled with the usual afternoon rush of tellers and small business owners depositing their daily cash, but I ignored the public floor entirely. I swiped my access card at the private elevator bank and pressed the button for the executive wealth management suites on the top floor. The heavy metal doors opened to a quiet, hushed reception area with panoramic views of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The receptionist started to ask if I had an appointment, but she stopped the moment she recognized my face. She immediately stood up and guided me down the wide mahogany hallway directly to the regional manager's office. Marcus was sitting behind his massive desk surrounded by multiple glowing monitors. He was a sharp, highly intelligent man who had personally managed my blind trust for the past 5 years. He was one of the very few people in the city who actually knew the massive scale of my wealth and the true market valuation of my artificial intelligence logistics firm. He knew that my so-called simple shipping hobby was actually a massive data network that revolutionized supply chain routes across the country. Marcus looked up as I walked in, and he immediately stood to close the heavy oak door behind me. His face was grim and deeply concerned. "Harper," he said, pushing a thick manila folder across his polished desk. "I was just about to call Evelyn and have her contact you securely. We have a massive red flag on your primary residential property." I sat down in the leather chair opposite him and opened the folder without rushing. "I already know, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly flat and calm. "Elijah and my brother-in-law Trent are trying to pull $1.5 million out of my home equity. They drained the $80,000 joint savings account exactly an hour ago." Marcus shook his head in absolute disbelief. He tapped the heavy stack of paperwork inside the folder. "They did not just apply for a standard loan, Harper. They submitted a full medical power of attorney document. It grants Elijah complete unchecked authority over all your financial decisions. The document literally claims you are stepping away from your business duties due to severe mental fatigue and emotional instability. It is completely notarized by a third party. Trent used his hedge fund credentials to push the application through our expedited commercial processing channel. They are expecting the funds to clear our system by tomorrow morning." I picked up the forged power of attorney document and studied it closely. The signature at the bottom was a flawless copy of my simple cursive handwriting. Savannah must have helped them practice it over and over again. The level of premeditation and pure malice was staggering. My own family had carefully constructed a fake legal narrative to paint me as mentally incompetent just so they could steal everything I had built. They really thought I was just a clueless warehouse manager in a safety vest. "I am rejecting the application right now," Marcus said, his fingers hovering aggressively over his keyboard. "I am freezing all your connected accounts and flagging this entire file for our internal fraud department. We can have the local police at your house to arrest them for attempted forgery before dinner time." "No," I said sharply. My voice echoed off the glass walls of the quiet office. Marcus froze and looked at me completely confused. "Harper, they are trying to steal over $1 million from you. This is a massive financial crime. You cannot let them get away with this." I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on his desk. "If you stop the transaction right now, it is just an attempted local forgery." I explained, my mind rapidly working through the severe legal implications Evelyn and I had discussed years ago when I first set up the Protective Blind Trust. "Elijah will just claim it was a marital misunderstanding. Trent will use his old money lawyers to tie the case up in local civil court for years. They will say I verbally agreed to the loan and then changed my mind because of my supposed mental instability. The local police will treat it as a messy domestic dispute. They will ultimately walk away with a slap on the wrist and try something else." I looked down at the forged signature again and felt a cold, terrifying smile form on my lips. "I want you to approve the loan, Marcus," I said, looking right into his eyes. Marcus stared at me as if I had lost my mind. "Harper, you cannot be serious. If I approve this application, the money goes directly into Trent's corporate hedge fund account. It leaves your protective trust umbrella and crosses into a totally external commercial entity. You will lose the money." "Exactly," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I want the funds to drop perfectly into Trent's account. I want him to see the digital notification on his phone and believe he actually won. I want them to celebrate tonight thinking they outsmarted me." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, slowly absorbing the aggressive strategy. He was a brilliant financial mind, and I could literally see the exact moment the realization hit him. His eyes widened and he let out a low, impressed whistle. "If the money drops directly into his account, it is no longer just a local forgery dispute," Marcus said, his voice hushed with realization. The funds will cross state lines into his Delaware-registered hedge fund. Yes, I replied, nodding slowly, emphasizing every single word. The moment that $1.5 million hits his commercial account, using a forged digital signature, it automatically becomes federal wire fraud. It becomes grand larceny. It triggers mandatory federal jurisdiction. Trent is not just defrauding a stressed-out warehouse manager. He is using his corporate entity to defraud a federally insured bank across state lines. Marcus looked at his glowing computer screen and then back at me. His initial panic had completely vanished, replaced by a deep, absolute professional respect. The FBI will be heavily involved. He noted a slight smile playing on his lips. The Securities and Exchange Commission will audit Trent's entire hedge fund. They will seize his servers, his bank assets, and everything connected to his business associates. And Elijah will go down as a primary co-conspirator to federal corporate fraud, I added smoothly. My sister will be implicated for receiving the stolen savings funds in her offshore account. My parents will be named as accessories for endorsing the fake mental incompetence claims. They thought they were dealing with a naive woman who would cry and scream and fight them in a pathetic family court battle. They wanted to play high finance and look down on me. So we are going to let them play the biggest game of their lives. Marcus smiled a tight, highly controlled smile. He turned back to his keyboard. His fingers moved rapidly across the keys, deliberately bypassing the automatic fraud alerts and pushing the massive loan application straight into the final approval queue. I need you to guarantee the money moves seamlessly, I said, watching the green approval bars light up on his monitor. They cannot suspect anything is wrong. They need to feel completely invincible tonight, so they lower their guards. The funds will clear at exactly 8 in the morning, Marcus confirmed, clicking the final heavy submission button. The transfer is completely locked in. $1.5 million will drop right into Trent's hedge fund account. The digital footprint is permanent and entirely irreversible. The exact moment his bank accepts the deposit, the federal crime is complete. There is a mandatory minimum sentence for federal wire fraud of this magnitude. I stood up from the leather chair and smoothed the front of my simple black blazer. Thank you, Marcus. Please forward all the transfer logs, the server timestamps, and the forged power of attorney documents directly to Evelyn's secure legal server. She is going to need the exact timestamps for the federal prosecutors tomorrow. Marcus stood up and shook my hand firmly. They picked the absolute wrong woman to underestimate Harper. This is going to be a total bloodbath. I walked out of the regional manager's office and headed back toward the private elevator. My steps were light and entirely purposeful. Elijah and Savannah were probably at the downtown hotel right now, celebrating their brilliant scheme in that red dress. Trent and my parents were probably drinking expensive champagne at the country club, toasting to their newfound generational wealth and social elevation. They thought they had destroyed me and taken my life. They had absolutely no idea that tomorrow morning when the sun came up, the federal government would be waiting at their front doors. The adrenaline from my meeting with Marcus carried me through the rest of the afternoon. I had barely checked into a secure hotel downtown when my phone began to vibrate violently across the nightstand. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass screen to answer. Harper. Vivian snapped her voice, carrying that familiar icy edge of absolute authority. Your father and I are waiting for you at the Oak Ridge Country Club. We are seated in the private dining room. You have exactly 45 minutes to get here, and apologize to Elijah and Trent. If you do not walk through these doors and beg for their forgiveness tonight, Calvin is officially cutting you out of the family trust, and we will fully support Elijah's petition for a psychiatric hold. I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror. They still thought they held all the cards. They still thought the threat of being cut off from a family trust that barely held $500,000 was enough to bring me to my knees. I will be there, I said, my voice perfectly flat, and ended the call. The Oak Ridge Country Club was a monument to old Southern pretense. It was a place where generational wealth went to congratulate itself. When I arrived, the maitre d' escorted me to the exclusive private dining alcove, tucked away behind heavy velvet curtains. The five of them were already seated around a massive circular mahogany table, acting as if they were royalty holding court. Savannah was draped in a new silk evening gown, her wrist intentionally resting on the table, so the new $20,000 Cartier bag was prominently displayed next to her crystal water glass. Trent sat at the head of the table swirling a glass of amber liquid, while Elijah sat beside my father looking impossibly smug. "Glad you could finally join us in the real world," Harper Trent said, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He gestured for me to take the empty chair at the far end of the table. "We were just discussing the logistics of the capital transfer. Do not worry your little head about it, though. We are handling the heavy lifting." I took my seat in silence, placing my simple leather clutch on my lap. The waiter arrived immediately, bowing slightly toward Trent. Trent did not even look at a menu. He ordered 2 bottles of the club's most exclusive vintage Bordeaux, a platter of beluga caviar, and 5 dry-aged Wagyu tomahawk steaks. "We have to celebrate," my brother-in-law announced loudly, ensuring the tables nearby could hear him. Bringing a blue-collar shipping business into a legitimate financial portfolio requires a significant toast. It is a heavy burden elevating urban businesses into high society. But my family has always believed in charity. Elijah chuckled and reached across the table to squeeze my mother's hand. "Harper is just overwhelmed," he said, adopting a tone of fake sympathy. "Tracking delivery trucks all day takes a toll on the mind. She needs rest. Once the $1.5 million equity loan clears tomorrow morning, she can finally step back and let a man manage her affairs properly." Savannah rolled her eyes and took a delicate sip of her wine. "Honestly, Harper, you should be thanking Elijah. He is saving you from yourself. If you just accept your place and stop trying to act like a corporate boss, we might still let you attend the country club galas as our guest." I sat there drinking my sparkling water and watching them feast. They gorged themselves on the expensive steaks and drained the vintage wine, laughing and plotting their future with my money. They spoke about vacation homes in the Hamptons and new luxury vehicles they planned to purchase by the weekend. They were so intoxicated by their own greed that they completely failed to notice how calm I was. 2 hours later, the plates were cleared and the waiter approached the table with a thick black leather folder. He placed it respectfully in front of Trent. The total bill was well over $5,000. Trent smiled magnanimously and patted the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. Then he patted his side pockets. His smile faltered into a perfect theatrical mask of confusion. "Oh, wow," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I must have left my wallet in my other jacket. The valet rushed me inside so quickly I completely forgot to grab it." Savannah giggled and leaned into him. "And Elijah's cards are completely tied up in the escrow transfer for the hedge fund until tomorrow morning," she added innocently. The entire table turned to look at me. The silence was heavy and entirely intentional. This was the ultimate power play. They had orchestrated this massive bill specifically to humiliate me and force me into submission. Vivian sighed loudly and gave me a sharp, disapproving glare. "Pay the bill, Harper. It is the absolute least you can do after your hysterical and embarrassing behavior this afternoon. Make yourself useful for once, and consider this your formal apology to the family. If you handle this quietly without making another scene, we might convince Elijah not to call the medical facility in the morning." My father tapped his fingers impatiently on the mahogany table. "Do not embarrass us in front of the club staff, Harper. Just pay the man." I looked around the table, absorbing their smug, expectant faces. I opened my simple leather clutch. I did not pull out a standard bank debit card. I bypassed my regular credit cards and reached into the hidden back slot. I pulled out a heavy, solid metal palladium black card. It was an invite-only reserve card issued exclusively to clients maintaining over $10 million in liquid private wealth. I tossed the heavy metal card onto the table. It landed with a loud, distinct metallic thud that cut right through the quiet hum of the dining room. The smug expression on Trent's face vanished instantly. As a hedge fund manager, he knew exactly what that card was. He knew the impossible financial requirements needed just to hold it in your hand. His pale blue eyes widened in absolute shock, and his jaw actually dropped. "Where the hell did you get this?" Trent stammered, breaking the silence. He leaned forward aggressively, his hand shooting out to grab the card. I slammed my palm down hard, catching his fingers against the mahogany wood before he could touch my property. I snatched the heavy black card back and handed it directly to the waiting staff member without breaking eye contact with Trent. "You do not touch my things, Trent," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "And you certainly do not touch my real money." Savannah looked back and forth between us, completely confused. "What is it?" she demanded. "It is just a credit card." "It is not just a credit card," Trent whispered, his face draining of color. He stared at me as if I had suddenly turned into a ghost. "You have to have a minimum of 10 million in liquid assets just to be invited to carry that." "Harper, how do you have that card?" I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. My mother and father were staring at me in stunned, breathless silence. The reality of the situation was finally beginning to penetrate their thick layers of arrogance. They were realizing that the daughter they thought was a struggling warehouse worker was sitting on a mountain of wealth they could not even fathom. I grabbed my clutch and looked down at my family. The waiter returned silently, placing the receipt and the heavy metal card back into my hand. "Enjoy the caviar," I said, my voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room. "And Trent, make sure you check your hedge fund accounts right at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Generational wealth moves very fast when the feds are watching." I turned to walk away, but Elijah shot up from his chair. His face was twisted in a sudden panicked rage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my sleeve. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "I do not know what kind of game you are playing," Harper Elijah hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "But I will make you pay for this. I am going to take everything from you." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm and then looked up into his desperate, angry eyes. I pulled my arm free with a violent jerk. "You already took everything you are ever going to get from me, Elijah. Pack a bag tonight. You are going to need it where you are going." I drove back to my neighborhood the next morning feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. The federal wire fraud trap was already in motion, but I knew Elijah would not go down without trying one last desperate power play. He was arrogant, but he was also incredibly greedy. As I turned the corner onto my street, I saw 2 police cruisers parked at sharp angles across my driveway. Their red and blue lights were flashing brightly against the pristine white columns of the house. Elijah was standing on the front porch looking perfectly distressed. Savannah was right beside him, playing the role of the deeply concerned sister to absolute perfection. She was rubbing his arm and looking at the officers with wide, innocent eyes. I parked my car on the street and walked up the long driveway. A tall male officer stepped forward immediately, holding up his hand to stop my approach. "Ma'am, I need you to stay right there," the officer said, his voice firm and highly professional. "Are you Harper?" I nodded, keeping my hands visible and my expression completely neutral. "We have received a domestic disturbance call." The officer continued, pulling a folded document from his vest pocket. "Your husband Elijah has filed an emergency restraining order against you. He claims you became physically violent and threatened his life last night after a severe mental breakdown." I looked past the heavy shoulders of the police officer. Elijah was watching me from the porch. He had actually managed to produce a fake red mark on his cheek. Savannah nodded vigorously at the police officer, confirming the massive lie. "It is true," Officer Savannah said, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Harper has been completely unstable for months now. She attacked him last night and screamed that she was going to destroy him and ruin his life. I saw the whole thing. I had to come over this morning just to make sure he was safe from her." The audacity of their lie was almost impressive. They were using the legal system to physically remove me from my own property so they could secure the house for their fraudulent hedge fund schemes without any interference. They thought throwing the police at me would break my spirit. The officer handed me the legal paper. "The judge signed an emergency order this morning based on the witness testimony. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of your husband or this residence. You have exactly 10 minutes to go inside, gather a bag of essential personal items, and leave the premises. If you refuse to comply, we will have to arrest you immediately. I looked down at the paper in my hands. It was a standard temporary restraining order. Elijah had weaponized my own house against me. He was trying to humiliate me in broad daylight in front of my own neighbors. I understand, officer. I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. I will pack my things quickly and peacefully. The second officer escorted me up the porch steps. As I walked past Elijah and Savannah, they parted just slightly to let me through. Elijah leaned in close as I passed by. The police officer was just far enough away not to hear his whisper. "I told you I would take the house." Elijah whispered, his breath hot against my ear. His voice was laced with pure malicious victory. "You are out on the street, Harper. The bank is processing the $1.5 million loan as we speak, and now you cannot even step foot on the property to stop it. You lost everything." I did not react to his taunt. I walked into the foyer and headed straight up the carpeted stairs to the master bedroom. The officer stood by the doorway watching me closely to ensure I did not destroy any property or try to attack my husband again. I pulled a simple duffel bag from the closet. I did not pack much. I threw in a few changes of comfortable clothes, my basic toiletries, and the charger for my laptop. I did not need anything else from this house. The expensive furniture, the custom artwork, the imported rugs, it was all just staging for a life I no longer wanted or needed. I was entirely ready to leave it all behind. Savannah stood at the bottom of the stairs watching me descend with my small bag. She smiled triumphantly, crossing her arms over her chest to show off her expensive jewelry. "Make sure you leave your keys on the console table," Savannah commanded, acting like she was the true lady of the manor now. "Elijah is changing the security codes anyway, but we want this done properly. You can go stay at a cheap motel while you get the psychiatric help you desperately need. We will mail you the divorce papers when the time comes." I set my keys gently on the mahogany table, right where the forged asset release papers had been sitting just 24 hours ago. The police officers escorted me back out to the front porch. Elijah was standing tall, looking like the absolute master of his domain. He had successfully kicked his wife out of her own home, using a fake domestic violence charge and his mistress sister as the primary witness. He thought he had executed the perfect crime and won the ultimate prize. I stopped right in front of him. The officers were standing by the patrol cars waiting for me to leave the property boundaries. I looked Elijah dead in the eyes and smiled. It was the same cold, calculating smile I had given them at the country club the night before. "Enjoy the house, Elijah," I whispered, my voice so low only he and Savannah could hear it. "I really hope you read the property deed carefully before you finalize that massive loan with Trent." Elijah's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second, his brow furrowed in sudden confusion. "What are you talking about?" he hissed, keeping his voice down so the police would not hear his aggression. I leaned in just an inch closer. "The house does not belong to me," I whispered, my tone light and conversational. "It belongs to a corporate limited liability company that I control completely, and I intentionally let the property taxes fall 6 months past due." I watched the exact moment the blood drained from his face. Savannah let out a small, confused gasp beside him. When Trent's fraudulent $1 million loan hits his bank account today, the state tax authority is going to trigger an automatic municipal audit on the deed. I continued, my voice dripping with quiet, absolute satisfaction. "They are going to freeze the entire property for tax delinquency. And when the federal investigators see a massive loan pulled against a tax-delinquent corporate asset using a forged power of attorney, you are not going to be facing family court, Elijah. You are going to be facing the IRS and the FBI at the exact same time." Savannah's face twisted into a mask of pure panic. She looked at Elijah, expecting him to have an answer, but he was completely frozen in shock. They had spent months planning a massive financial takeover, but they had never bothered to check the basic public tax records. Their greed had completely blinded them to the fundamental details of real estate law. Elijah stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish on a dock. He reached out as if to grab me, but the police officer down the driveway shouted a sharp warning to step back. I adjusted my duffel bag on my shoulder and walked away from the porch. I walked down the driveway past the police cruisers and toward my car. Elijah and Savannah were left standing in the doorway of a massive suburban mansion that was essentially a ticking federal time bomb. The trap was fully sprung, and there was absolutely no way out for either of them. I climbed into my car and tossed the duffel bag into the passenger seat. I started the engine and slowly pulled away from the curb. I watched them in my rearview mirror. Elijah was frantically pulling out his cell phone, probably to call Trent and try to stop the wire transfer, but I knew it was already too late. The federal banking system opens at 8 in the morning, and it was currently 9:15. The funds had already dropped. The crime was already committed. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a message from Evelyn confirming that the FBI field office had received our complete dossier. I drove toward the city, feeling the morning sun warming my face. I was leaving my past behind and stepping into a future that belonged entirely to me. The drive into downtown Atlanta gave me exactly 30 minutes to process the morning. The trap was set, the bait was swallowed, and the steel jaws were currently snapping shut around my treacherous family. I pulled into the secure parking garage of the steel and glass skyscraper that housed Evelyn's law firm. Evelyn was not just an attorney, she was a financial assassin. She had built a ruthless reputation in corporate litigation and asset protection, and she was the only person I trusted when I structured my logistics company years ago. I rode the private elevator up to the top floor. The heavy glass doors slid open to reveal a pristine white marble reception area. The receptionist immediately waved me through, pointing toward the corner suite. I walked down the quiet hallway and pushed open the heavy mahogany door to Evelyn's office. Evelyn was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city with a cup of black coffee in her hand. She wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit, and her dark hair was pulled back into a severe bun. She turned around as I closed the door behind me, and a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She walked over to her massive glass desk and tapped the screen of her laptop. "The wire transfer cleared exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes ago," she said, her voice crisp and deeply satisfied. $1.5 million moved from your frozen trust directly into Trent's hedge fund account. It crossed state lines and used federal banking networks. The fraud department at First National has already automatically forwarded the packet to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have them, Harper. The federal wire fraud is locked in and irreversible. I sat down in the leather chair across from her desk, letting out a long, slow breath. Elijah just used a fake domestic violence order to kick me out of the house, I told her. He and Savannah are standing on the porch right now, thinking they own the property. They have absolutely no idea about the property tax audit that is about to drop. Evelyn let out a sharp, dry laugh as she sat down across from me. She opened a thick black physical file folder that was resting on her desk. "Well, they are going to have much bigger problems than a tax audit very soon," she said, sliding the folder toward me. "I had my private investigators dig into both Trent and Elijah while you were setting the bait at the bank yesterday. You are going to want to see what we found." I opened the folder. The first few pages were highly detailed background checks and financial histories. I scanned the dense text, trying to make sense of the chaotic numbers. Evelyn did not wait for me to read it all. "Trent is not old money," she stated bluntly. "He does not come from generational wealth. His last name might be on a country club building somewhere, but his family officially disowned him 6 years ago for embezzling from his own grandfather's estate. He has absolutely zero access to family capital. He is completely broke, Harper. He has been living off credit lines and appearances for years." I stared at Evelyn, completely stunned. The expensive Italian shoes, the vintage wine, the constant bragging about his elite social circle, it was all a meticulously crafted illusion. Trent was nothing but a high-class con artist wearing a nice suit. "It gets worse," Evelyn continued, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the glass desk. "His hedge fund is completely fake. It is a crumbling Ponzi scheme. He has been using new investor money to pay off the old investors just to keep the lights on, and he is currently about $2 million in the red. He needed that $1.5 million from your house just to stop the Internal Revenue Service from seizing his final assets. He was desperate to steal your equity because his entire fake empire was about to implode by the end of the week. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Savannah thought she had married into elite society, but she had actually married a desperate criminal who was drowning in debt. But why would Elijah go along with this? I asked, trying to connect the final pieces of their plot. Elijah had a good job in real estate. He did not need to commit federal fraud just to please my sister. Evelyn flipped to the next section of the file. Elijah lost his job 3 months ago. She corrected her voice, turning grim. He was quietly terminated for ethics violations. And the reason he was violating those ethics is because your husband has a severe gambling addiction. I looked down at the financial statements Evelyn pointed to. The numbers were staggering. There were massive cash withdrawals, missing retirement funds, and depleted secret accounts I never even knew he had. He owes over $300,000 to some very dangerous illegal bookies, Evelyn explained. These are not credit card companies, Harper. These are people who break legs and burn down houses when they do not get paid. Elijah is terrified. He drained your joint savings account yesterday, not just to fund Trent's scheme, but to pay the weekly interest on his gambling debt so they would not come looking for him. He partnered with Trent because Trent promised him a massive payout from your stolen house equity. They are both desperate broke men playing a very dangerous game of survival. I sat back in the chair feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. The entire arrogant display at the house, the taunts at the country club, the designer bags, it was all a desperate, frantic cover-up. My family had conspired to destroy my life, not just out of greed or jealousy, but out of absolute survival. They were drowning, and they decided to use my hard-earned money as their life raft. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger harden into something much more calculated. Well, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. The FBI is going to seize Trent's account today. Those bookies are not going to get their money, and Trent's fake hedge fund is going to collapse publicly. They brought this entirely on themselves. Evelyn did not smile this time. Her expression remained completely serious as she reached into her desk drawer. She pulled out a slim digital tablet and placed it face down on the glass between us. Financial ruin and federal prison are bad, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, quiet whisper. But that is not the worst part of what I found out today. She pushed the tablet across the desk toward me. I looked at the back of the device, my pulse suddenly picking up speed. What else could there possibly be? I asked. Evelyn tapped the screen, flipping the tablet over so I could see the document displayed on the bright glass. It was a highly confidential medical file from a private clinic across town. Look at Savannah's medical records, Evelyn instructed, watching my face closely. I picked up the tablet and scanned the medical chart. The patient name was clearly listed as Savannah, and the date was from just 2 days ago. I read the primary diagnosis line and the words seemed to blur together before suddenly coming into sharp, terrifying focus. Savannah was exactly 8 weeks pregnant. My sister is pregnant, I whispered, feeling a strange cold numbness spread through my chest. I did not know if I should feel pity or disgust. Trent is going to be a father right as he goes to federal prison. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, carrying a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy and suffocating. Trent absolutely thinks the baby is his, Evelyn said, her words deliberate and precise. But Trent is completely sterile, Harper. The medical records in his background check show he had an irreversible procedure 10 years ago. He physically cannot have children. I stared at Evelyn, my mind struggling to process the impossible information. If Trent was sterile, then who was the father? The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The timeline, the secret meetings, the coordinated theft of my house, the way Savannah defended Elijah to the police this morning, and the way Elijah bought her a $20,000 designer bag to celebrate. They were not just partners in a financial crime. Evelyn watched the exact moment the truth shattered my reality. "The baby is not Trent's," she said quietly. "The baby belongs to your husband." The silence in Evelyn's office felt absolute and suffocating. "The baby belongs to your husband," she had said, and those words echoed in my mind like a heavy, physical blow. My sister and my husband were not just trying to steal my financial empire. They had been sleeping together in my own home while actively plotting my absolute destruction. The betrayal was so deep and so vile that it bypassed typical anger and went straight into a cold surgical focus. I did not cry. I did not break down. Instead, I reached into my laptop bag and pulled out my computer, opening it right there on Evelyn's pristine glass desk. Elijah thought my logistics company was just moving cardboard boxes around. He truly believed I was just a glorified shift supervisor who played with shipping manifests. What he never bothered to understand was that my company operated on a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence network that tracked thousands of high-value shipments globally in real time. And more importantly, he forgot who actually paid for the luxury European sedan he loved driving so much to impress his friends. The car was entirely registered to my corporate fleet, which meant it was fully integrated into my proprietary tracking network. I bypassed the standard employee portals and logged directly into the administrative master grid. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, typing in the specific vehicle identification number for Elijah's car. Evelyn leaned over my shoulder, watching the screen light up with a highly detailed map of the city. A blinking red dot appeared instantly. The car was currently moving north on the interstate, heading away from my house. With a few more keystrokes, I activated the remote diagnostic suite. The luxury sedan was equipped with a continuous internal dash cam and a highly sensitive microphone array designed for hands-free calling and corporate security monitoring. The dealership told Elijah it was a premium safety feature, but they deliberately never mentioned that the primary fleet owner had full remote access to the cabin. I clicked the audio feed button and routed the sound directly through the high-quality speakers in Evelyn's office. At first, there was only the low hum of the highway tires on the asphalt and the soft sound of the car's climate control system. Then a voice cut clearly through the silence. It was Savannah. Her voice was breathless and laced with an ugly, frantic excitement. "Did you see her face?" Elijah. Savannah laughed, the sound sharp and grating. "Harper looked like she was going to be sick when the police told her to pack a bag. She actually thought she could embarrass us at the country club last night with that stupid black card, but now she is literally homeless." Elijah let out a deep, satisfied chuckle. His voice sounded so relaxed and so incredibly arrogant. "She got exactly what she deserved, Savannah," he said. "Harper has always been too independent and too stubborn for her own good. She thought she was so smart, hiding her money from me. But tomorrow morning, that $1.5 million is going to sit perfectly in Trent's account, and she will not be able to do a single thing about it. She is going to be locked in a psychiatric ward before she even finds a lawyer." I hit the internal record button on my screen, capturing every single word onto a secure encrypted cloud server. Evelyn crossed her arms and listened intently, her eyes narrowing as the live conversation continued. But then Savannah's tone shifted completely. The playful arrogance dropped away, replaced by a cold, calculating edge that sent a literal chill down my spine. "We have to move exactly on schedule tomorrow, Elijah," Savannah said, her voice dropping much lower in the cabin. "Trent is an absolute idiot. He really thinks we are going to let him use Harper's money to save his pathetic sinking hedge fund. He actually believes we are a team." Elijah's laugh was darker this time and full of pure malice. "Trent is just a useful idiot, Savannah. The moment the bank clears that wire transfer at 8 in the morning, we execute our bypass protocol. I already copied the digital access tokens for his corporate account when he left his laptop open at the house. We will reroute the entire $1.5 million directly into our offshore account in the Cayman Islands before Trent even finishes his morning coffee." I stared at the screen, watching the little red dot move steadily across the digital map. They were not just stealing from me, They were executing a massive double cross. Savannah sighed, leaning back in the passenger seat. The microphone picked up the distinct rustle of her expensive silk dress. Good, Savannah said coldly, because I am not sticking around here to deal with the inevitable fallout. As soon as the money hits the offshore account, we are leaving the country. Trent will be the only one with his name on the fraudulent bank loan. The FBI will look at his failing hedge fund and they will see he was the one who directly received the stolen funds. He will take the fall for the entire federal wire fraud and we will be completely untouchable living on a beach. And your parents? Elijah asked, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. They enthusiastically endorsed the fake medical power of attorney. When the federal agents come knocking for Trent, your parents are going to be dragged right into the middle of a massive federal conspiracy investigation. They could lose their house, their country club memberships, everything they care about. I do not care about them. Savannah snapped, her voice completely devoid of any familial loyalty whatsoever. Mom and Dad are just collateral damage. They have been extremely useful for keeping Harper in line and making her feel small, but they are dead weight to us now. We have the money, and we have our baby Elijah. We need to disappear immediately before I start showing, and Trent figures out he is not the father. Let my stupid parents sink with him. They deserve it for being so gullible and easily manipulated. I reached out and stopped the live audio feed, saving the recording into 3 separate, highly secure locations. The silence returned to the office, heavy and profoundly disturbing. The sheer absolute evil of their master plan was staggering. Savannah and Elijah were fully prepared to commit federal wire fraud, frame Trent for the entire crime, and let our own parents face federal conspiracy charges just so they could run away with the stolen millions and their secret child. They were going to completely destroy the arrogant white brother-in-law and ruin their own parents without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. Evelyn looked at me, her dark eyes wide with actual shock. She had seen decades of ruthless corporate warfare and brutal divorces, but even she was momentarily stunned by the sheer calculated malice of what we had just witnessed. They are going to burn their entire family to the ground just to cover their tracks, Evelyn whispered. I looked down at the tracking map and then out the window at the sprawling city skyline, bathed in the morning light. My heart was beating in a steady, powerful rhythm. They had built the perfect trap to destroy Trent and my parents, but they had completely forgotten who actually controlled the board. I looked back at Evelyn and a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. They are certainly going to try, I said, my voice perfectly steady and cold as ice. But Savannah and Elijah just gave us the exact weapon we need to destroy them all at once. Package this audio file, Evelyn. It is time to show them what real power looks like. I left Evelyn's office feeling a cold surge of pure adrenaline pumping through my veins. The audio recording was safely backed up on 3 different secure servers. My sister and my husband had laid out their entire pathetic criminal conspiracy on a silver platter for me, and now it was time to serve it back to them. I drove back to my luxury apartment to prepare for the evening. It was Thanksgiving Day, and my parents Calvin and Vivian were hosting their annual highly extravagant dinner at their massive suburban estate. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose a stunning emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly, framing my silhouette. I applied my makeup with absolute precision. I wanted to look entirely flawless when I watched their carefully constructed world burn to the ground. I arrived at the family mansion just as the sun was setting. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, including the ridiculous European sedan I had bought for Elijah, the car that had just recorded his ultimate betrayal. The moment I walked through the heavy double doors, the smell of roasted turkey and expensive sage stuffing hit me. The catering staff was rushing around the foyer carrying silver trays and crystal glasses. My mother Vivian was standing near the grand staircase wearing too much jewelry and ordering the staff around like a petty tyrant. She spotted me and immediately frowned. "You are late." "Harper?" she sighed, waving a manicured hand at me. "Savannah and Trent have been here for an hour. Please try not to cause a scene tonight. We have a very important evening planned." I did not react to her usual condescension. I just smiled a tight, polite smile and walked past her into the formal living room. The air in the room was thick with manufactured happiness. Elijah was standing by the marble fireplace holding a glass of scotch. He looked nervous but tried to mask it with a highly arrogant smirk when he saw me. He really thought he had won. He thought the 1.5 million was currently sitting securely in his offshore account, and I was just a pathetic rejected wife showing up for a pity dinner. Savannah was clinging tightly to Trent's arm, wearing a ridiculous flowing cream-colored dress that somehow made her look innocent and fragile. Trent was holding a glass of vintage champagne, holding court, and bragging loudly about his latest fake real estate investments to my father Calvin, who was nodding along with deep respect. We all moved into the massive formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set with my mother's finest china and polished silver. The tension was incredibly thick, but my parents pretended everything was perfectly normal. My mother made a passive-aggressive comment during the soup course about how I should take notes from Savannah on how to keep a successful husband happy. I just smiled and took a slow sip of my red wine, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably. Halfway through the main course, Savannah tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon. The sharp ringing sound cut clearly through the quiet dining room. She stood up slowly and placed a protective hand over her perfectly flat stomach. The performance was absolutely Oscar-worthy. "Trent and I have an amazing announcement to make," Savannah said, her voice trembling with beautifully manufactured emotion. "We are expecting a baby." The room erupted in predictable chaos. My mother shrieked with absolute joy and rushed over to hug her golden child. My father raised his glass in a booming toast to the expanding family legacy. But Trent's reaction was the most pathetic performance of all. He actually started crying fake tears of absolute joy. He stood up and kissed Savannah's cheek, puffing out his chest with unearned pride. "A true heir to the Blackwood legacy," Trent announced loudly, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "My grandfather would be so incredibly proud to know the family name is continuing into the next generation." I watched Elijah sitting directly across the table from me. He was playing the role of the supportive, proud uncle to absolute perfection. He raised his glass to Trent, clapping him on the shoulder and offering his warmest congratulations. It was utterly sickening. They were all sitting there celebrating a child conceived in pure deceit, while Savannah and Elijah were actively plotting to steal millions and completely destroy the man who thought he was the father. I waited patiently until the celebrations died down and everyone returned to their seats to continue eating. The room was quiet again except for the soft clinking of expensive silverware against china. I looked directly at Trent, leaning forward, just slightly resting my hands on the table. My voice was calm and highly conversational, but it carried clearly across the dining room. "That is such wonderful news," Trent, I said, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. "It is truly a blessing, especially considering the terrible rumors I heard down at the financial district today. I heard the federal authorities are currently auditing your family's entire trust fund and actively investigating your hedge fund for massive wire fraud." The effect was immediate and completely catastrophic. The heavy crystal wine glass slipped right out of Trent's hand and shattered violently against the polished mahogany table. Dark red wine spilled everywhere, soaking into the expensive white linen tablecloth, looking exactly like fresh blood. All the arrogant color drained completely from Trent's face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. His eyes darted frantically around the room, and thick beads of sweat instantly broke out across his forehead and upper lip. He began taking short, panicked breaths. "What on earth are you talking about?" "Harper," my father demanded, looking at Trent with sudden deep suspicion and then glaring fiercely at me. Trent was completely frozen, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. Savannah looked at Elijah, her eyes wide with sudden absolute panic. Their entire secret timeline was collapsing right in front of them. They thought the federal heat would only come after they successfully fled the country. But I was bringing the absolute nightmare straight to their Thanksgiving dinner table. Before my father could yell at me again, a heavy, booming knock echoed through the massive front doors of the mansion. The sound was sharp and highly demanding, completely ruining the quiet, elite suburban atmosphere. My mother frantically gestured for the catering staff to answer it, but the heavy doors pushed open before the staff could even reach the foyer. A tall man in a dark, unbuttoned suit walked straight into the formal dining room, completely ignoring the shocked protests of the catering staff. He locked eyes with Trent, who was still trembling and sweating profusely over his shattered wine glass. The man walked right up to the head of the table and dropped a thick, heavy stack of legal papers directly onto the spilled red wine. "Trent Blackwood," the man said, his voice deep and echoing in the dead, silent room. "You have been officially served." The process server turned on his heel and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a silence so absolute it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked from the air. Trent stared at the thick stack of papers soaking up the spilled red wine as if they were a live explosive. My father reached across the table with a shaking hand and snatched the top document from the puddle of wine. His eyes scanned the bold black lettering and the official government seals. "Federal wire fraud." My father read, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "Securities and Exchange Commission investigation." "What is this, Trent? What did you do?" Trent opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic wheezing sound came out. He looked like a cornered animal. My father stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy mahogany chair backward onto the hardwood floor. The loud crash made Savannah jump. "I trusted you with my investments!" My father roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "I introduced you to my entire country club network. I vouched for you." My father took a heavy step toward Trent, raising his hand, but he never made it across the room. He suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, clutching the center of his chest with both hands. A terrible gasping sound tore from his throat. His eyes rolled back into his head and his knees buckled. "Calvin!" My mother screamed as my father collapsed heavily onto the floor, crashing into the side of the dining table and pulling the expensive linen tablecloth down with him. Silver plates and crystal glasses shattered all around his twitching body. The next 45 minutes were a chaotic blur of flashing ambulance lights and manufactured panic. I drove my own car behind the ambulance, watching the flashing red and blue lights reflect off the wet asphalt of the highway. I felt incredibly calm. My heart rate was perfectly steady. The trap I had set for Trent had triggered a massive chain reaction that was rapidly exposing the rotting foundation of my entire family. Their greed had finally caught up with them. We sat in the sterile, white waiting room of the cardiac intensive care unit. The harsh fluorescent lights made everyone look pale and sick. Savannah was pacing the floor, dramatically crying and holding her stomach to make sure everyone remembered she was pregnant. Elijah sat next to her, looking completely terrified. He knew that if Trent went down for federal wire fraud, the illegal bookies would be coming for him next. The $300,000 he owed was a death sentence, and his only lifeline was currently holding federal indictments. My mother was wringing her hands, muttering prayers and casting dark glances in my direction, as if I had somehow orchestrated my father's poor cardiovascular health. Trent sat in the far corner, staring at his phone with a blank, panicked expression. He was frantically tapping the screen desperately, trying to log into offshore accounts that Evelyn and the federal government had completely frozen hours ago. His fake empire was entirely gone. A doctor in dark blue scrubs finally walked through the double doors. His face was grim and exhausted. The room fell dead silent as my mother rushed up to him. "Your husband suffered a massive myocardial infarction," the doctor told my mother, his voice strictly professional. "We stabilized him for now, but the damage is severe. He needs an emergency arterial bypass surgery immediately to survive the night." My mother let out a loud, dramatic sob, clutching her expensive pearls. "Do whatever you have to do," she cried. "Save him." The doctor hesitated, looking uncomfortable as he pulled a clipboard to his chest. "There is a significant complication, ma'am," he explained. "The specific, highly specialized surgical team required for this complex bypass is entirely out of network for your current insurance plan. Because of the experimental nature of the graft, they require a massive upfront payment before they will operate." The hospital administration requires a deposit of $100,000 immediately to authorize the surgical team to begin. My mother did not even blink. She immediately turned her tear-stained face toward her golden son-in-law, Trent. She said, her voice filled with absolute entitlement and expectation. "You need to pay this right now. It is just a drop in the bucket for your hedge fund. Save your father-in-law." Trent physically shrank back into his plastic waiting room chair. The blood drained from his face all over again. I watched him squirm, perfectly trapped in his own web of lies. He was a billionaire on paper, but he could not even afford a cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria right now. Vivian. I cannot. Trent stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "My assets are tied up right now. My accounts are temporarily frozen because of a minor clerical error with the bank. I do not have access to any liquid capital tonight." My mother stared at him in utter disbelief. The illusion of the billionaire son-in-law was shattering right before her eyes. She looked at Savannah, who was suddenly very quiet, staring at the linoleum floor. Then my mother's eyes darted wildly around the room until they landed squarely on me. "Harper," my mother demanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You need to fix this right now. You have good credit. You have that logistics job. Go to the bank right now and take out an emergency loan. Put your house up as collateral if you have to. You are going to pay for your father's surgery." The audacity of her demand was almost poetic. She wanted me to put my house up as collateral, completely unaware that Elijah and Savannah had already stolen my equity that very morning, using a forged signature. They had robbed me blind, and now my mother expected me to bankrupt myself to save the man who had enabled my abusers for my entire life. I looked at my mother, feeling nothing but cold, profound disgust. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Savannah lunged forward, her face twisted with pure venom and desperation. "This is all your fault," Savannah screamed, pointing directly at my face, her voice echoing loudly down the hospital corridor. "You did this, Harper. You brought up that stupid audit at dinner. If Dad dies, it is your fault for stressing Trent out. You ruined our Thanksgiving, and now you are going to let our father die just because you are jealous of my perfect life." I stood up slowly, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in my emerald silk dress. I looked at Savannah, then at Trent, who was still sweating in the corner, and finally at my mother, who was looking at me like I was a monster. "I am not jealous." "Savannah?" I said, my voice echoing coldly off the sterile hospital walls, perfectly calm and perfectly detached. "And I am not taking out a loan to pay for a single thing. You all wanted to worship a fake billionaire so you can ask him to sell one of his imaginary yachts. I am not giving any of you a single dime." I turned my back on their gaping mouths and walked out of the intensive care waiting room without another word. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's frantic sobbing and Trent's pathetic excuses. The hospital corridor was cold and empty, smelling sharply of bleach and stale coffee. I walked down 2 flights of concrete stairs until I found a quiet, deserted landing away from the security cameras. My father was a deeply flawed man who had spent my entire life placing my sister on a pedestal while actively dismissing my every achievement. But he was still my father, and I was not a murderer. I pulled my phone from my clutch and logged into the highly encrypted administrative portal for my logistics company. Years ago, Evelyn had advised me to set up a corporate philanthropic arm for tax purposes and anonymous charitable donations. It was fully funded and completely untraceable to my personal name. I navigated to the hospital billing department portal, typing in my father's patient identification number. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, bypassing the insurance requirements and selecting the option for a direct anonymous wire transfer. I authorized the immediate release of $100,000 directly to the surgical team. The screen flashed green, confirming the transaction was complete and the emergency bypass surgery was officially funded. My father was going to live, but my family did not need to know that. Let them believe they were facing absolute financial ruin. Let them sweat in that waiting room, believing the hospital was going to refuse treatment or force them into massive generational debt. It was the exact kind of reality check they desperately needed. I slipped my phone back into my bag and walked slowly back up the stairs. As I approached the cardiac wing, I took a shortcut through a narrow secondary hallway lined with private consultation rooms. The corridor was dimly lit and quiet, but as I passed the second door, I heard the unmistakable sound of hushed, frantic whispering. I stopped instantly, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall. The door was cracked open just an inch. "We cannot do it," Savannah Elijah was hissing, his voice tight with absolute panic. "If we try to pull $100,000 out of the Cayman offshore account right now, it will flag the international wire system. The federal investigators are already freezing Trent's domestic assets. If we move that money, they will trace the routing numbers straight back to us, and we will both end up in federal prison." I held my breath, listening to my husband calculate the exact value of my father's life. "But Elijah, he is my dad," Savannah whispered, her voice trembling with what sounded like actual fear. "If we do not pay the surgical deposit, he is going to die tonight. Mom has nothing liquid and Trent is completely ruined. We have $1.5 million sitting right there. We have to use it." Elijah let out a harsh, desperate sigh. "Think about this, Savannah. Really think about it. We stole that money from Harper so we could escape. If we pay for this surgery, we expose the entire offshore account. The feds will seize everything we have left. We will have absolutely nothing. No getaway, no luxury life in Monaco, no designer clothes for the baby. We will be broke, and we will be indicted for wire fraud. Your dad had a good long life, but we have to protect our own future." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I waited for Savannah to scream at him, to slap him, to demand that they save the man who had spoiled her rotten since the day she was born. "You are right," Savannah finally whispered, her voice turning incredibly cold and practical. "If we get caught now, we lose everything. Dad would want us to prioritize the baby anyway. We just have to act devastated and tell Mom that Trent's accounts are completely locked down. We keep our mouths shut, and we get on a plane the second this audit blows over." The sheer sociopathic greed of her statement made my blood run absolutely cold. She was actively choosing her stolen designer lifestyle over her own father's life. She was willing to let him die on an operating table just to protect the money she had stolen from me. I was just about to step away from the wall when I heard a sharp gasp coming from the other end of the hallway. I turned my head and saw my mother standing in the shadows just a few feet away. Vivian looked completely shattered. Her expensive makeup was smeared, and her hands were trembling violently. She had heard them. She had heard Elijah say the money was gone, and she had heard Savannah agree to let Calvin die to protect her own future. The absolute truth of her golden child was laid bare right in front of her. My mother locked eyes with me. I waited for the realization to sink in. I waited for her to march into that room and demand answers from Savannah. I waited for the grand illusion of our perfect family to finally break. But Vivian's mind simply could not accept the monster she had raised. The cognitive dissonance was too massive. Instead of looking at the consultation room, she marched straight toward me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, irrational hatred. "You did this," my mother hissed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest, her voice dripping with venom. "I heard them talking Harper. I heard that the money is gone. You set Trent up tonight. You made the federal agents freeze his accounts out of pure spite and jealousy. You destroyed your sister's husband, and now your father is going to die because of your selfish petty games." She was actually blaming me. She had just heard Savannah actively choose to let Calvin die. But Vivian's broken mind immediately twisted the narrative to protect her golden child, making me the ultimate villain once again. "If your father does not survive the night, Harper," my mother whispered, stepping so close I could smell the stale wine on her breath, "you are entirely responsible for his murder." I stared right back into Vivian's furious eyes, letting her ridiculous accusation wash over me without a single blink. I did not flinch, and I did not argue. I just turned on my heel and walked away from her, leaving my mother standing alone in that dark hospital corridor with her delusions. The next 48 hours were a tense waiting game. The anonymous $100,000 wire transfer cleared immediately, and the specialized surgical team worked through the night to perform the emergency bypass. Calvin survived. He was weak and heavily sedated, but the doctors moved him into a private recovery room on the cardiac floor. It was early Tuesday morning when Vivian summoned everyone for a mandatory family meeting right there in my father's hospital room. The sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with the underlying tension as we all gathered around Calvin's bed. My father was barely conscious, his eyes half closed as the machines beeped rhythmically beside him. Savannah and Trent stood at the foot of the bed, holding hands, while Elijah lingered near the window, trying to look casual. My mother stood next to the heart monitor, holding a pristine manila folder. Her face was set in a mask of absolute self-righteousness. This near tragedy has forced us to reevaluate our priorities, Vivian announced, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Your father and I realize that the Blackwood legacy must be protected at all costs, especially given the recent instability in this family. She glared directly at me as she said the word instability. She opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Calvin has decided to update his last will and testament. Vivian continued, holding the papers up like a trophy. He signed this just an hour ago while the rest of you were getting coffee. Effective immediately, the entire family estate, the stock portfolios, and the $5 million life insurance policy are being placed into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust will be Savannah and Trent's unborn child. Harper, you are officially and permanently, completely disinherited. Savannah let out a dramatic little gasp and leaned her head against Trent's shoulder. Oh, Mom, that is so generous, she murmured, wiping away a fake tear. We will make sure the baby knows how much Grandpa loved them. Trent puffed out his chest, looking visibly relieved. He clearly thought this massive new trust fund would somehow save him from the federal nightmare breathing down his neck. He had no idea Savannah and Elijah were planning to leave him, taking every single cent with them. I looked at my father, who was currently staring blankly at the ceiling, completely out of it. The heavy painkillers and sedatives made him look like a ghost. There was absolutely no way that man had the cognitive or physical ability to read, let alone sign a complex legal document just an hour ago. May I see that? I asked. Extending my hand toward my mother, my voice was perfectly calm. Vivian hesitated, clutching the papers tightly to her chest, but Elijah stepped forward from the window. Let her read it, Vivian, Elijah said, a mocking smile playing on his lips. It is fully legally binding. She needs to understand that she has absolutely nothing left. My mother reluctantly handed me the heavy stack of papers. I flipped past the dense legal jargon, going straight to the final signature page. I stared at the ink. The signature read, Calvin Blackwood, but it was entirely wrong. The loop on the C was too sharp, and the slant of the letters leaned heavily to the left. It was not my father's signature at all. I had spent years looking at Elijah's handwriting on mortgage documents, car leases, and fake business proposals. I knew the exact aggressive way he crossed his T's and the specific pressure he put on the pen. Elijah had forged the signature. He had stood right here while my father was essentially unconscious and falsified a legal will to funnel the entire family fortune directly into the hands of Savannah's unborn child. The child that was actually his. It was a brilliant, desperate move. Elijah and Savannah were not just stealing my $1.5 million anymore. They were trying to liquidate my parents' entire estate and take that with them to the Cayman Islands too. They were actively bleeding everyone in this room completely dry before their grand escape. I looked up from the forged document and met Elijah's eyes. He raised his chin, staring back at me with pure, arrogant defiance, challenging me to say something. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was just a defeated woman who had lost her husband, her money, and now her inheritance. I opened my mouth to speak, to tear their entire pathetic charade wide open right there in the cardiac ward. But before a single word could leave my lips, my phone vibrated sharply in the pocket of my emerald dress. It was a specific sustained vibration pattern that I had programmed into my master administrative grid. I slowly pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. It was an encrypted alert from the bank. The digital bypass protocol had just been triggered. The fraudulent $1.5 million loan that Elijah and Savannah had taken out, using my stolen equity, had officially cleared. The massive sum of money had just dropped directly into Trent's corporate account. The little red notification light blinked steadily on my screen. The money had moved across state lines, crossing the digital threshold into a federally monitored banking system. The trap had snapped shut. The federal wire fraud was no longer just a plan or a conspiracy. It was now a fully executed, completed federal crime, and Trent's name was the only one on the receiving end. I looked up from my phone, slowly sliding it back into my pocket. I looked at Trent, who was still smiling proudly about the fake will. I looked at Elijah, who was already mentally spending his stolen millions on a beach. I handed the forged will back to my mother with a perfectly serene smile. "Congratulations, Savannah," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "You really have secured your future. I cannot wait to see exactly how this all plays out." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, cold silence. I retreated to my apartment and ignored the constant barrage of aggressive text messages from my mother and Elijah. They demanded I hand over the deed to my house to cover my father's remaining hospital bills, completely ignoring the fact that they had already stolen all of my liquid assets. They thought I was hiding in shame. They genuinely believed I was sitting in the dark, crying over my ruined marriage and my lost inheritance. What they did not know was that I was spending 12 hours a day sitting in Evelyn's pristine conference room with a team of federal agents. The 3 men assigned to my case were forensic accountants for the FBI. We went through every single digital footprint Savannah and Elijah had left behind. The audio recording from the car was the smoking gun, but the financial data was the nail in the coffin. The agents tracked the $1.5 million from the moment it fraudulently cleared into Trent's accounts to the exact second Elijah illegally transferred it to their offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. The wire fraud was completely documented, but Savannah could not help herself. Her vanity was a disease. She could not sit on stolen money without spending it immediately to impress people who did not actually care about her. Savannah decided to host an insanely extravagant baby shower to celebrate the child she claimed was the heir to Trent's crumbling legacy. She booked the grand ballroom at the elite Atlanta Country Club, a place so exclusive it usually took years of waiting and a massive fortune just to get through the front gate. She funded the entire event, using the stolen money, completely oblivious to the fact that federal agents were watching every single transaction clear in real time. When the day of the shower finally arrived, I dressed with surgical precision. I chose a tailored black suit that fit me like armor. I pulled my hair back tight and wore no jewelry. I was not there to play the role of the supportive sister or the grieving wife. I was there as the executioner. I pulled up to the country club an hour after the event had started. The valet line was packed with luxury vehicles. The grand entrance was flanked by completely ridiculous towering archways made of imported white orchids and pale pink roses. The sheer cost of the floral arrangements alone could have paid off a mortgage. I walked toward the heavy glass doors with Evelyn right by my side. She carried a thick leather briefcase holding the finalized federal indictments. Walking directly behind us were 3 federal agents. They wore sharp black suits and dark sunglasses, moving with a synchronized heavy authority that immediately made the valet staff step nervously out of the way. We entered the main foyer and the noise of the party washed over us. A live 10-piece jazz band was playing a cheerful tune. The grand ballroom was overflowing with Atlanta high society local politicians, wealthy socialites, and desperate internet influencers holding up their phones. There were massive ice sculptures shaped like baby carriages, flowing champagne towers, and a mountain of gifts wrapped in expensive designer paper. In the center of the room, Savannah was holding court. She wore a custom silk maternity gown and a diamond necklace that I instantly recognized as my grandmother's heirloom. The one my mother had sworn was lost in a move years ago. Elijah was standing next to her, holding a glass of scotch and laughing loudly with a local city councilman. Trent was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in his office, dealing with the total collapse of his hedge fund, completely unaware that his wife and brother-in-law were spending the fraudulent loan on champagne and caviar. My mother, Vivian, was stationed near the entrance greeting guests with her perfectly practiced fake smile. The moment she saw me step through the floral archway, her smile dropped completely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure panicked outrage. "What do you think you are doing here?" Harper, Vivian hissed, stepping directly into my path and throwing her arms out wide to physically block me from entering the ballroom. "You were expressly not invited to this event. This is Savannah's special day, and you are absolutely not going to ruin it with your jealous negativity." I did not break my stride. I looked right through her as if she were entirely invisible. "You need to leave right now," my mother demanded, her voice rising sharply in pitch, drawing the attention of several wealthy guests standing near the coat check. "Security!" she yelled, waving her manicured hand frantically at a club employee. "Someone call security and have this woman removed immediately before she upsets my pregnant daughter." I did not even slow down. The 3 federal agents stepped smoothly around me, forming a solid wall of dark suits between my mother and myself. One of the agents reached inside his jacket and casually flashed his gold badge directly in my mother's face. Vivian's mouth fell open in absolute shock. Her eyes went wide and the blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She stumbled backward, tripping over the hem of her expensive dress, her hands trembling as she realized the men with me were not private security, but federal law enforcement. I walked past her without a single word. My eyes were locked entirely on the main stage at the front of the ballroom. The crowd parted for me, naturally sensing the heavy, intimidating energy radiating from my small procession. Whispers erupted instantly, spreading across the room like wildfire as the elite guests recognized the disgraced sister crashing the golden child's lavish party with men in black suits. I ignored all the staring faces and the hushed gossip. My focus was absolute. I walked up the small set of stairs and stepped onto the main stage. The bandleader looked at me in total confusion as I marched directly up to his microphone stand. I reached out and firmly took the microphone right out of his hands. A sharp screech of audio feedback echoed loudly through the massive ballroom. The piercing sound instantly silenced the jazz music and cut off every single conversation in the room. Hundreds of faces turned to stare at me in dead silence. Savannah dropped her champagne flute, and it shattered violently against the polished hardwood dance floor. Elijah's arrogant smirk completely melted off his face, replaced by a look of sudden trapped terror. He stared at the 3 men in black suits standing at the base of the stage, and he knew exactly what they were. His breathing turned shallow and his hands started shaking. The entire ballroom was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. The tension was incredibly thick, heavy with the terrifying anticipation of a public disaster. Savannah took a trembling step forward, her hands clutching the skirt of her designer gown, pretending to look like a frightened victim for her wealthy audience. "Harper, what are you doing?" Savannah asked, her voice cracking artificially, masking her absolute panic with fake innocence. "Please do not do this today." I stood at the center of the stage holding the microphone, looking down at the sister who had slept with my husband, plotted to destroy my life, and actively chosen to let our father die, just to protect her stolen wealth. My voice echoed through the high-end speakers, perfectly calm and dripping with absolute ice. "I did not bring a gift, Savannah." I said, my words carrying clearly across the silent sea of shocked guests. "But I brought the truth." I turned my head slightly and gave Evelyn a single sharp nod. She was already standing by the audio-visual control board at the back of the room. She hit a button on her tablet, and the massive digital screens that had been displaying a looping montage of Savannah and Trent's fake perfect relationship suddenly went black. A second later, they lit up again, but this time they were displaying high-resolution images of Trent's actual financial records. The crowd murmured in confusion, as bank statements, debt collection notices, and legal disownment papers flashed across the walls. I looked down at Trent, who was frozen in place, his mouth hanging open like a dying fish. "Let us start with the proud father to be," I said into the microphone, my voice ringing with total authority. "Trent Blackwood, or should I say Trenton Miller, since your prominent family formally disowned you 3 years ago. You see, everyone, Trent is not a billionaire hedge fund manager. He is a broke, desperate grifter, drowning in massive debt. His accounts have exactly $0 in them, and his supposed real estate empire does not actually exist." The murmurs in the ballroom grew into loud gasps of outrage. Wealthy socialites were pointing at the screens, and the internet influencers immediately began live streaming the disaster. "That $1.5 million you are all currently drinking and eating today," I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "It did not come from Trent's imaginary fortune. It came from a fraudulent loan taken out against my personal logistics company. Trent, you just committed federal wire fraud," I said, pointing directly at him. "And my friends here are fully prepared to hold you accountable." The 3 federal agents in black suits moved with terrifying speed. Before Trent could even take a step backward, they grabbed his arms, twisting them violently behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly in the stunned ballroom. Trent started screaming and thrashing against the agents, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Savannah, tell them," he yelled, his face red and slick with sweat. "Tell them it was your idea. You have to help me." Savannah immediately burst into tears, backing away from him and putting her hands over her face. She played the fragile, pregnant victim to absolute perfection. "I did not know," she sobbed loudly, making sure the entire crowd could hear her trembling voice. "He lied to me. He told me he was wealthy. Elijah, please protect me from him." She ran toward my husband, burying her face in his chest and acting as if she were completely terrified of the man she had just planned to frame. I watched her pathetic performance and let out a short, bitter laugh that echoed harshly through the speakers. "Oh, Savannah, you knew everything I said," my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You knew exactly what you were doing." I gave Evelyn another nod. The screen shifted, displaying a simple green audio waveform, and the crisp, high-definition speakers of the elite country club suddenly broadcast the exact recording I had pulled from Elijah's car. The sound filled the entire ballroom, crystal clear, leaving absolutely no room for denial. There was Elijah's voice dripping with pure malice, laughing about how Trent was just a useful idiot who would take the fall for everything. Then Savannah's cold, calculating voice filled the room, plotting to execute the bypass protocol and transfer the stolen $1.5 million directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The wealthy guests listened in absolute horror as Savannah detailed exactly how they were going to flee the country and frame Trent for the entire federal crime. The crowd heard her casually dismiss our parents, saying she did not care if they lost everything and faced federal conspiracy charges just so she could escape with the cash. But the ultimate bomb was yet to come. The recording continued, and Savannah's voice echoed loud and clear over the dead silent crowd. "We have the money, and we have our baby Elijah. We need to disappear immediately before I start showing, and Trent figures out he is not the father. Let my stupid parents sink with him." The audio played Elijah's dark laugh as Savannah added the final lethal blow. "The baby is yours, Elijah. Trent is just a stupid white boy raising our kid." A collective massive gasp sucked all the air out of the grand ballroom. Women covered their mouths in pure shock. Politicians and socialites stared in absolute revulsion at Savannah and Elijah, who were now standing completely frozen in the center of the dance floor. The silence lasted for one terrifying second before absolute chaos erupted. Trent let out a guttural, animalistic scream that tore his vocal cords. The realization that he was facing federal prison for a child that belonged to his brother-in-law completely broke his brain. Despite the heavy steel handcuffs binding his wrists behind his back, Trent went absolutely ballistic. He lunged forward with terrifying force, throwing his entire body weight directly at Elijah. His shoulder slammed into Elijah's chest, sending both men crashing violently into a table of expensive crystal champagne glasses. Elijah scrambled backward, slipping on the spilled champagne and broken glass, his face pale with pure cowardly terror. He stumbled to his feet, leaving Savannah completely alone to face the mob, and tried to run toward the emergency exit. But the moment he made a move, two massive country club security guards and one of the federal agents stepped directly into his path, shoving him hard against the wall and pinning him there. There was absolutely nowhere left to run. I looked over to the entrance of the ballroom. My mother, Vivian, was standing perfectly still, staring at her golden child. The reality of the recording, the sheer undeniable evil of Savannah's words, had finally broken through her deep, lifelong delusions. She had heard her favorite daughter admit to framing an innocent man, carrying on a sickening affair with my husband, and plotting to destroy our entire family without a single ounce of remorse. Vivian's eyes rolled back into her head. Her knees buckled and she collapsed heavily onto the marble floor, passing out cold from pure absolute shock. The room erupted into absolute pandemonium the moment my mother hit the floor. The wealthy socialites who had been sipping champagne just minutes ago were now frantically shoving each other out of the way, holding their phones high in the air to record every single second of the Blackwood family destruction. The flash of smartphone cameras illuminated the grand ballroom like strobe lights, capturing the complete downfall of a dynasty that had prided itself on untouchable perfection. Trent was still screaming his throat raw as he struggled violently against the federal agents who held him in a completely inescapable grip. His face was contorted with a mixture of betrayal and absolute panic as he stared at Savannah. Elijah was pinned against the floral archway by club security, his expensive tailored suit torn at the shoulder, his face bruised and completely drained of that arrogant smirk he always wore. He looked like a cornered rat darting his eyes wildly around the room, looking for an exit that simply did not exist. Savannah was huddled on the floor, shivering and clutching her diamond necklace, crying real tears now because she finally understood that her stolen wealth was entirely gone and she was about to face a federal judge. Several country club employees rushed forward with wet napkins and smelling salts, dropping to their knees beside my mother. Vivian stirred groggily, batting their hands away. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a split second she looked confused. Then her gaze locked onto my face, and the horrific reality of the audio recording the federal agents and the shattered remains of her perfect family came crashing back down on her. Vivian did not stand up with her usual refined grace. She did not try to smooth her designer dress or fix her hair. Instead, she scrambled forward on her hands and knees across the sticky, champagne-soaked hardwood floor. The woman who had spent my entire life looking down her nose at me, evaluating my worth based on my bank account and my obedience, was literally crawling at my feet in front of hundreds of elite guests. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the fabric of my black suit jacket, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching the fabric like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. "Harper, please!" Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking with pure desperate hysteria. "You have to fix this. I heard what they said on the recording, but you are rich now. You are the one with all the power. You have the money to make all of this go away. Please, Harper, pay the lawyers, bribe the agents, do whatever it takes to save your brother-in-law. You have to save our reputation. People are recording us, Harper. Please, you cannot let our family legacy end like this. You have to protect us." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked at her smeared makeup, her tear-stained cheeks, and the absolute frantic terror in her eyes. She had just heard Savannah actively wish for my father's death. She had just heard Savannah and Elijah plot to frame an innocent man and steal millions of dollars. And yet my mother's only concern was her social reputation. She was still demanding that I use my resources to protect the very people who had tried to destroy me. The sheer, unbreakable delusion of her request completely severed the final tiny thread of emotional attachment I had left for her. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. Just a cold, clinical emptiness. A deep, quiet peace settled into my bones, knowing I would never have to seek this woman's approval ever again. I reached down and gently but firmly pried her fingers off my jacket, letting her hands drop back down to the floor. "You called me a failure," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the chaotic noise of the ballroom, ensuring that every single camera recording us caught my words perfectly. "You stood in the hospital and blamed me for my father's heart attack to protect a daughter who was praying for him to die. You stood in that hospital room and let Elijah forge dads while trying to leave me with absolutely nothing while they ran off with everything. You raised a monster, Vivian. You nurtured Savannah's greed, and you fed her entitlement every single day of her life. You chose a beautiful illusion over your own daughter, and now you get to live in the reality you created." Vivian stared up at me, her chest heaving, her mouth opening and closing, as she tried to find the words to argue, to manipulate, to twist the narrative one last time. But there were no words left. The truth was entirely bare, and it was ugly. I turned to Evelyn, who stepped forward and handed me one final document. It was not a part of the federal indictment, it was personal. I looked down at my mother and let the thick, legally bound packet drop from my hand. It landed with a heavy thud right in her lap. Vivian's trembling hand slowly picked it up, and she stared at the bold black letters on the front page. It was a notice of foreclosure. Months ago, when I first discovered Trent's massive financial ruin, I also took a very close look at my parents' accounts. Calvin had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on the family mansion to help fund Savannah's extravagant lifestyle and to cover his own failing investments. When he defaulted on the payments, the bank put the debt up for sale. My logistics company quietly bought that debt through an anonymous subsidiary. I owned their house. "Read it carefully, Mother," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You and Dad have exactly 30 days to vacate the property. I suggest you start packing your designer bags tonight because the locks will be changed on the 1st of the month and anything left inside will be thrown directly into a dumpster." Vivian let out a hollow, broken wail, clutching the foreclosure notice to her chest as she finally realized that her entire world was completely over. There would be no grand recovery, no elegant dinners at the country club, no pretending to be the queen of Atlanta high society. She was going to be entirely homeless and completely disgraced. I did not wait for her to say another word. I turned my back on her and walked straight toward the main exit. The crowd parted for me, their cameras still recording, their mouths hanging open in stunned silence. Evelyn walked right beside me, her posture immaculate, holding her briefcase like a shield. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the country club, the cool night air hit my face. In the distance, the wailing sound of multiple police sirens pierced the quiet suburban streets, growing louder and closer by the second. Local law enforcement was arriving to assist the federal agents with the arrests. The flashing red and blue lights began to reflect off the tall oak trees lining the driveway. I walked to my waiting car and slid into the back seat. I did not look back at the grand ballroom. I did not look back at the flashing lights, or the screaming guests, or the family that had tried to bury me. I just looked forward as the car pulled smoothly away, leaving the absolute wreckage of the Blackwood family far behind me. The next few months passed in a blur of sterile courtrooms, blinding camera flashes, and relentless legal proceedings. The media absolutely devoured the story. The spectacular downfall of Atlanta high society was front-page news for weeks, and every single sordid detail of the Blackwood family drama was dragged out into the harsh light of day. I sat quietly in the back of the federal courthouse, with Evelyn watching as the justice system methodically dismantled the lives of the people who had tried to destroy mine. Trent was the first to fall. Despite his expensive defense attorneys and his endless crying on the witness stand, the paper trail was simply too overwhelming. The federal prosecutors presented the banking records proving he had received the stolen $1.5 million. His defense that he was just a clueless pawn manipulated by his wife and brother-in-law did not save him from the wire fraud charges. The judge was completely unmoved by his tears, noting that his entire lifestyle had been built on a foundation of lies and unpaid debts. Trent was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The day the guards led him away in an orange jumpsuit, he looked back at the gallery searching for anyone to mourn him. The benches were completely empty. His aristocratic family had publicly disowned him again, and Savannah did not even bother to show up to the sentencing. Elijah's trial was even more satisfying to watch. The brilliant corporate attorney who had thought he was smarter than everyone else was completely humiliated on public record. The audio recordings from his car were played in open court, exposing not only the financial conspiracy, but his deeply unethical personal conduct. The State Bar Association disbarred him immediately, stripping away his license to practice law and publicly condemning his actions. The forensic accountants traced every single fake document he had filed, including the forged signature on my father's will. Elijah was convicted of wire fraud conspiracy to commit fraud and multiple counts of forgery. The massive legal fees drained whatever legitimate money he had left, forcing him to declare absolute bankruptcy before he was even sentenced. He was handed 10 years in federal prison. The arrogant smirk was permanently wiped from his face, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who realized he had lost everything for a woman who would never visit him. Savannah managed to avoid prison by turning state's evidence against both of them, crying to the prosecutors that she was just a helpless pregnant woman caught in the crossfire of two greedy men. But avoiding jail time was the only victory she got. Abandoned by Trent, who was locked away and disgusted by her betrayal, and abandoned by Elijah, whose assets were entirely frozen and seized, Savannah was left with absolutely nothing. The elite social circle she had sacrificed everything to impress dropped her instantly. Her country club memberships were revoked. Her phone stopped ringing, and the internet influencers who had attended her baby shower now made viral videos mocking her downfall. Without the stolen money or a wealthy husband to fund her lifestyle, she was forcefully evicted from her luxury penthouse. She ended up moving into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, a cramped space with peeling paint and rattling pipes. Her bank accounts were frozen, leaving her completely destitute. Evelyn had hired a private investigator just to keep an eye on her, making sure she did not try to flee the state. The reports I received were almost pitiful. Savannah, the golden child who had once scoffed at anything less than perfection, was now spending her days taking desperate, poorly lit photos of her old designer bags and shoes, selling them on online auction sites just to afford baby formula and basic groceries. The absolute reality of her choices had finally crushed her entirely. My parents' fate was arguably just as poetic. 30 days after I dropped the foreclosure notice in my mother's lap, they were officially locked out of the massive estate they had lorded over everyone for decades. Their remaining friends quickly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with a family tied to multiple federal indictments and extreme public scandal. Calvin, whose health remained fragile after the bypass surgery, lost his remaining business contracts as his reputation completely disintegrated. With their assets seized to pay off massive mounting debts and legal fees, my parents were forced to downsize drastically. They ended up renting a cramped 2-bedroom condo in a nondescript building entirely devoid of the luxury and status they worshipped. The private investigator reported that Vivian rarely left the condo anymore. The woman who had lived for social events and country club galas was now too deeply ashamed to even show her face at the local grocery store, terrified of being recognized by anyone from her former life. They were trapped together in a tiny space surrounded by the ghosts of their ruined legacy and the suffocating weight of their own terrible decisions. As for me, my logistics company continued to thrive, expanding into international markets and doubling its revenue. The corporate philanthropic arm I had established was fully funded, dedicating resources to helping women rebuild their lives after financial abuse. I bought a beautiful minimalist home surrounded by massive oak trees and a quiet lake far away from the toxic noise of Atlanta high society. I was finally living a life built entirely on my own terms, free from the exhausting expectations and conditional love of a family that had never truly valued me. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed on my desk. I was sitting in my home office sipping a cup of hot tea and reviewing a quarterly financial report. I glanced at the screen and saw an incoming call from a restricted number. The caller ID flagged it as an automated call from a federal correctional facility. I let it go to voicemail, keeping my eyes focused on the spreadsheet in front of me. A minute later, a notification popped up indicating a new audio message. I set down my pen and tapped the screen, opening the voicemail interface. "Harper," the automated voice announced, "you have a prepaid message from an inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution." There was a brief crackle of static followed by Elijah's voice. He sounded weak, desperate, and completely broken. The smooth confidence that had once drawn me to him was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, trembling whine. "Harper, please." Elijah begged, his voice echoing hollowly through the prison phone system. "Please do not delete this. I know you hate me. I know I deserve everything that happened. But the conditions in here are horrible. I have nothing left, Harper. Savannah will not even accept my calls. Please, I am begging you, find it in your heart to forgive me. Just talk to me. Please just put some money on my commissary account so I can—" I did not listen to the rest of his pathetic plea. My face remained perfectly calm, completely unmoved by the desperate begging of a man who had tried to steal my future. Without a single second of hesitation or a single ounce of regret, I swiped my finger across the screen. The screen flashed, confirming the action, and the message vanished into the digital void. I set the phone face down on the polished wood of my desk, picked up my pen, and went back to work. Exactly 1 year had passed since that chaotic night at the country club, and the heavy silence of my new reality was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I stood perfectly still in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my sleek, glass-walled penthouse office, letting the bright morning sunlight warm my skin. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet as I looked down at the sprawling city of Atlanta spreading out below me like a vast concrete ocean. Up here on the 50th floor, the air was clear and the toxic noise of my past could not reach me. The digital ticker tape scrolling along the bottom of the giant monitor on my wall showed a constant stream of green numbers moving steadily upward. My artificial intelligence logistics company had officially gone public just 2 hours ago, and the market response was nothing short of spectacular. The stock was surging, crushing every single projection my financial analysts had dared to make. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me in the present moment. I was no longer the discarded daughter or the betrayed wife. I was the founder and chief executive officer of a billion-dollar publicly traded empire. The heavy glass door behind me clicked open, and the soft sound of confident footsteps echoed across the room. I turned around to see a team of people I had handpicked entering my office. My chief technology officer, my head of operations, and my financial director were all smiling, carrying a stack of early market reports. They were brilliant, driven professionals who respected me for my vision and my leadership, not for my family name or my social status. We exchanged quiet words of congratulations, reviewing the initial trading volumes and celebrating the fact that our years of exhausting late nights and impossible deadlines had finally paid off. There was no backstabbing here, no jealousy, and no secret plots. I had built a culture of absolute loyalty and mutual respect, something I had never experienced in my own childhood home. As my executive team filed out to return to the trading floor, Evelyn walked in. She looked as sharp and unbothered as ever, wearing a tailored navy blue suit and carrying a single slim leather portfolio. Over the past year, Evelyn had transitioned from my personal attorney to the chief legal counsel for my entire corporation. She had fought fiercely by my side through every single messy court battle and corporate negotiation, proving herself to be an invaluable ally. She walked directly to my massive desk and placed the leather portfolio carefully on the glass surface. "Congratulations on the public offering, Harper," she said, her voice holding a rare tone of genuine warmth. The board is absolutely thrilled, and the media is already calling it the most successful tech launch of the quarter. But I brought you something even better than a soaring stock price. I walked over to the desk and looked down at the dark leather folder. I already knew what was inside, but my heart still did a strange little flutter of anticipation. I reached out and opened the cover. Resting on top was the final divorce decree. It was fully executed, stamped by the state, and permanently entered into the public record. "It is completely over," Evelyn said quietly, watching my face. "The judge signed off early this morning. Your personal assets are completely shielded, and your corporate equity is entirely yours." Because of Elijah's federal convictions and his documented fraud attempts, the prenuptial agreement was upheld in full. He was denied any form of spousal support or settlement. He gets absolutely nothing, Harper. You are completely free. I stared at the bold black ink of the judge's signature, and then at the jagged, messy signature Elijah had provided from the visiting room of the federal penitentiary. A profound wave of weightless relief washed through my entire body. The final chain tying me to the Blackwood family nightmare had been officially severed. My money, my company, my future, and my spirit belonged exclusively to me. My assets had multiplied beyond anything my parents or my ex-husband could have ever comprehended. But the money was just a byproduct. The real victory was my unbroken spirit. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said, closing the folder and running my hand over the smooth leather. "I honestly do not think I could have navigated the darkest parts of last year without you standing there with me." "You saved yourself," Harper, Evelyn replied, picking up her briefcase. "You had the evidence and you had the courage to use it. I just filed the paperwork. Take the rest of the day to let it all sink in. You have built an empire and you deserve to enjoy the view." After Evelyn left, I walked back to the towering glass windows and looked out at the skyline once again. The towering skyscrapers glittered in the mid-morning sun. Somewhere far out beyond the city limits, Trent and Elijah were waking up in tiny concrete cells, facing years of miserable confinement. They were locked in cages, wearing matching uniforms, eating horrible food, and realizing every single day that their greed had cost them their freedom. Somewhere in a rundown suburban apartment, Savannah was likely waking up to the sounds of a crying baby she never actually wanted, surrounded by the cheap knockoff bags she was trying to sell just to pay her utility bills. And somewhere in a cramped rented condo, my parents were sitting in bitter silence, mourning the loss of their mansion, their country club status, and the golden children they had sacrificed everything to protect. I had not destroyed any of them. I had not planted fake evidence or spun elaborate lies or stabbed anyone in the back. I had simply refused to let them destroy me. I had gathered the truth, and I had held it up to the light, forcing the entire world to see them exactly as they were. Their own arrogance, their own toxic greed, and their own vicious betrayals had been the very things that tore their lives to pieces. A deep, quiet peace settled into my soul as I watched the clouds move slowly across the blue sky. I had spent so much of my life believing that I needed to earn my place at a table that was actively trying to starve me. I had thought power was about screaming the loudest, or having the most expensive clothes, or crushing people under your heel. But standing in my penthouse office, completely untouched by the ruins of my former family, I finally understood the truth. True power is not about destroying your enemies. True power is having the absolute discipline to walk away and watch them destroy themselves while you steadily, quietly build an empire they can never touch. It is the ultimate sweet revenge, knowing that they have to live the rest of their pathetic lives watching you soar higher than they could ever reach. My desk phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. I took one last long look at the beautiful, sprawling city below me. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, feeling more alive and more completely myself than I ever had before. I turned my back on the window and walked confidently toward my desk, ready to answer the call and continue building my legacy. The past was completely dead, and the future was entirely mine. The greatest lesson you can take from this journey is that your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see it. Sometimes the family we are born into cannot provide the respect we deserve, and that is not a reflection of your value, but of their own deep limitations. True power does not come from actively seeking revenge or trying to destroy those who hurt you. It comes from having the absolute courage to walk away, to protect your peace, and to build an empire so strong and authentic that their toxicity can never touch you again. Your healing finally begins the exact moment you decide to choose yourself over their impossible expectations. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below and please subscribe to hear more journeys of strength and survival.